The shooting range was alive with energy on a crisp Saturday morning. The air buzzed with the sharp crack of rifles and the occasional murmur of conversation. A group of young shooters had gathered near the firing line, their expensive gear gleaming under the bright fluorescent lights. They stood tall, chests puffed out, exchanging stories about their latest victories in competitions and bragging about their perfect scores. Among them was Jake, the self-proclaimed leader of the pack. He wore his confidence like a badge of honor, always quick to remind everyone that he was the best shooter around. Jake's friends hung on to his every word, laughing at his jokes and nodding along as he described how he'd once hit a target from an impossible distance. "You guys should have seen it," he said, gesturing dramatically. "Clean shot, right through the center, not even a scratch on the edges." His audience erupted into applause, feeding his ego even more. For Jake and his crew, the shooting range wasn't just a place to practice. It was their stage, and they were the stars. But amidst all the noise and bravado, something, or rather, someone, caught their attention. An elderly woman shuffled into the range, her presence almost unnoticed at first. She moved slowly, leaning slightly on a wooden cane for support. Her gray hair was neatly tied back, and she wore simple clothes that didn't scream wealth or status. In one hand, she carried a worn leather case, its surface scratched and weathered from years of use. To the elitists, she looked completely out of place. As she made her way to an empty station at the far end of the range, the group couldn't help but notice her. At first, they whispered among themselves, their voices dripping with mockery. "What is she even doing here?" one of them asked, loud enough for her to hear. Another chimed in, "This isn't bingo night, lady." Their laughter filled the air, echoing off the walls of the range. They weren't trying to hide their disdain. If anything, they wanted her to know exactly what they thought of her intrusion into their world. Eleanor Grayson, however, paid no mind to their jeers. She set up her station with calm precision, placing her cane against the counter before opening her rifle case. Inside lay a bolt-action rifle, its wooden stock polished to a warm glow. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed like an antique relic, outdated and irrelevant in an age of high-tech firearms. But those who understood rifles would recognize it immediately. A masterpiece of craftsmanship, built not just for accuracy, but for endurance. It was clear that this weapon had seen decades of use, yet it remained in impeccable condition. The elitists, oblivious to the history behind the rifle, only laughed harder when they saw it. "Look at that thing," one of them exclaimed. "It probably still uses black powder." Another added, "Yeah, I bet she shoots blanks." Their cruel comments continued, each one more cutting than the last. They were so caught up in their own amusement that they failed to see the quiet dignity with which Eleanor handled her equipment. Every movement she made was deliberate, measured, and full of purpose. Jake, feeling emboldened by the laughter of his friends, decided to take things a step further. Strutting over to Eleanor's station, he leaned casually against the counter, his smirk firmly in place. "Ma'am," he began, his tone dripping with condescension, "you sure you're in the right place? Maybe you should stick to knitting or something safer." His words hung in the air, heavy with disrespect. Behind him, his friends burst into another round of laughter, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Eleanor didn't flinch. Without looking up from her preparations, she replied softly but firmly, "Son, I've been handling rifles since before your parents met. You might want to save your jokes for someone who cares." Her voice carried a weight that momentarily silenced Jake. There was something about the way she spoke, calm, yet commanding, that gave him pause. But Jake quickly shook it off, dismissing her response as nothing more than the ramblings of an old woman. "Crazy old bat," he muttered under his breath as he rejoined his group, shaking his head in mock pity. Unfazed by the encounter, Eleanor continued setting up her station. She loaded each bullet with meticulous care, her hands steady despite their wrinkles. Her focus was absolute, as if the rest of the world had faded away. She adjusted her ear protection, took a deep breath, and raised her rifle. The elitists watched with smug expressions, fully expecting her to embarrass herself. After all, how could someone so frail possibly compete with their state-of-the-art gear and years of training? Little did they know they were about to witness something extraordinary. As Eleanor lined up her first shot, the atmosphere in the room shifted ever so slightly. The elitist's laughter died down, replaced by a sense of anticipation. Whether they realized it or not, they were about to learn a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. And Eleanor, she was ready to show them exactly why assumptions could be dangerous. As Eleanor continued preparing her rifle, the elitists grew louder in their mockery. Their laughter echoed through the range, bouncing off the walls and mingling with the sharp cracks of gunfire from other shooters. They seemed unable or unwilling to stop themselves. Every movement Eleanor made became fodder for their jokes. One of them pointed at her hands, wrinkled and weathered by time. "Look at those fingers," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "She can barely hold the gun." "Steady," another chimed in. "Yeah, I bet she couldn't hit the broadside of a barn door if she tried." Their words were cruel, but they didn't seem to care. To them, Eleanor was just an easy target, someone who didn't belong in their world of precision and skill. They acted as though her presence was an insult to their craft, a disruption to the image of perfection they had worked so hard to cultivate. Jake, still emboldened by his earlier confrontation, decided to take things even further. He strutted over to Eleanor's station once again, this time leaning closer, his smirk wider than before. "All right, Grandma," he said, his tone laced with condescension. "Let's see what you've got. Prove us wrong." His friends erupted into cheers behind him, egging him on. "Yeah, show us what you're made of," one of them shouted. The challenge was clear. Eleanor was being dared to step up and prove herself, but not because they believed she could. No, they wanted to watch her fail, to confirm their belief that she was nothing more than a frail old woman playing at something far beyond her capabilities. Eleanor didn't rise to the bait. She remained calm, her focus unshaken. Without sparing Jake a glance, she adjusted her stance slightly, ensuring her feet were planted firmly on the ground. Her grip on the rifle tightened ever so slightly, her fingers finding the familiar grooves of the stock. She exhaled slowly, steadying her breath, and then raised the weapon to her shoulder. The elitists leaned forward, their smug grins widening, as they anticipated the inevitable miss. The crack of the rifle shattered the air, sharp and sudden. For a brief moment there was silence. Then the crowd began to murmur. The elitists froze, their expressions faltering as they turned toward the target board. 50 yards away, dead center of the bullseye, was a perfect hole. No scatter, no deviation. Just a clean, precise shot that left no room for doubt. Jake's smirk wavered. He blinked, as if trying to process what he was seeing. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. He quickly recovered, striding over to inspect the target himself. Even up close, there was no denying the skill behind the shot. The bullet had struck the exact center of the bullseye, leaving a tiny, perfectly round hole. It was the kind of shot that required not just aim, but patience, control, and years of experience. Despite the undeniable evidence in front of him, Jake refused to admit defeat. Instead, he doubled down on his skepticism. "Probably rigged the sights," he said dismissively, turning back to his friends. They nodded along, eager to agree with anything that would preserve their fragile egos. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. A few of them exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence wavering ever so slightly. Meanwhile, Eleanor reloaded her rifle with practiced ease. If she noticed the tension in the air, she gave no indication. Her movements were fluid and deliberate, each action carried out with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before. She reached into her pocket, pulling out another bullet and slid it into the chamber with a soft click. Then, without hesitation, she took aim once more. This time, her target was smaller and farther downrange, a tiny metal plate, barely visible to the naked eye. The elitists watched intently, their smugness replaced by curiosity. Some of them leaned forward, squinting to get a better look at the distant target. Others crossed their arms, trying to maintain their air of indifference. But there was no denying the shift in the atmosphere. Something about Eleanor's quiet confidence had captured their attention, forcing them to take her seriously, even if only for a moment. The sharp ping of metal rang out, startling everyone. The tiny plate flipped backward, struck cleanly by Eleanor's bullet. The crowd gasped audibly, their eyes darting between the target and the elderly woman standing calmly at her station. Spectators who had been quietly observing began whispering among themselves. Who was this woman? How could someone so frail move with such precision? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, but impossible to ignore. Jake felt a flicker of unease creeping into his chest. He tried to push it aside, masking it with arrogance. "All right, Grandma," he said, his voice louder this time, as if trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "Let's see if you can keep up when we make things interesting." His friends cheered him on, their enthusiasm tinged with nervousness. They wanted to believe that Eleanor's shots were flukes, products of chance rather than skill, but deep down, they weren't so sure anymore. Eleanor lowered her rifle and turned, to face Jake for the first time. Her expression was unreadable, neither triumphant nor angry. She simply stared at him, her piercing gaze cutting through his bravado like a knife. For a brief moment, Jake felt exposed, as though she could see straight through him. But then she spoke, her voice soft yet firm. "If you want to play games, son, I'm happy to oblige. Just remember, humility is a virtue." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jake hesitated, unsure how to respond. He had expected her to be intimidated, to shrink under the weight of his taunts. Instead, she stood tall, unfazed by his attempts to belittle her. It was disconcerting, to say the least. But Jake wasn't ready to back down, not yet. He straightened his posture, forcing a grin onto his face. "Fine," he said, his tone clipped. "But don't come crying when you lose." Eleanor didn't reply. She simply returned to her station, reloading her rifle with the same calm efficiency she had shown before. The elitists exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado replaced by a growing sense of apprehension. They had started the day expecting to dominate the range, to assert their superiority over anyone who dared to challenge them. But now, faced with Eleanor's quiet confidence and undeniable skill, they found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew. As the tension in the room continued to build, one thing was certain. Whatever happened next, it would change the way Jake and his friends viewed the world, and themselves, forever. Jake's challenge hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and charged with tension. The elitists gathered around, their earlier mockery replaced by a mix of curiosity and apprehension. They had seen Eleanor's first 2 shots, perfect, unshakable, and impossible to dismiss as luck, but they still couldn't bring themselves to fully believe what they were witnessing. Jake, desperate to reclaim control of the situation, proposed a competition, a series of increasingly difficult targets at varying distances with penalties for missed shots. He set the rules heavily in his favor, confident that no matter how skilled Eleanor appeared, she couldn't possibly outlast him. The crowd at the range began to grow as word spread about the impromptu showdown. Spectators trickled in from other stations, drawn by the buzz of excitement. Some leaned against the walls, while others stood shoulder to shoulder near the firing line, eager to watch the spectacle unfold. Whispers rippled through the group. "Who is she?" one spectator asked. "Never seen her here before." Another replied, "Doesn't matter who she is. She just hit that tiny plate like it was nothing." The energy in the room shifted. The elitist's arrogance was beginning to crack under the weight of Eleanor's quiet confidence. Eleanor listened patiently as Jake explained the rules of the challenge. She didn't interrupt or argue, simply nodding along as if humoring a child. When he finished, she looked at him directly and said, "All right, son, let's see what you've got." Her tone was calm but firm, devoid of any sarcasm or malice. It was clear she wasn't doing this to prove a point or to embarrass anyone. For Eleanor, this was simply another day at the range, a chance to do what she loved, regardless of who was watching. The first round began with Jake taking the lead. He stepped up to the firing line, his high-powered rifle gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His movements were flashy, designed to impress rather than execute. He fired rapidly, each shot accompanied by a dramatic flourish. The crowd watched, intently as his bullet struck the target board, one close to the center, another slightly off, and a third completely missing its mark. Jake winced but quickly brushed it off, blaming the recoil of his weapon. "This thing's got too much kick," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. His friends nodded along, though their enthusiasm seemed forced now. When it was Eleanor's turn, the atmosphere changed. She approached the firing line with the same deliberate calm she had shown since arriving. Her rifle, though older and less flashy than Jake's, felt like an extension of her body. She took her time, adjusting her stance and steadying her breath. Then, without hesitation, she fired. The crack of the rifle echoed through the range, followed by an audible gasp from the crowd. Each of her shots landed perfectly within the bullseye, clean and precise. There was no wasted movement, no unnecessary drama, just pure skill. The second round introduced moving targets, designed to test the shooter's ability to adapt. Jake struggled almost immediately. His rapid-fire approach faltered as the targets darted unpredictably across the range. One shot missed entirely, striking the wall behind the target board. Another grazed the edge of a silhouette, earning a penalty. Sweat began to bead on his forehead and his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his aim. "These targets are rigged," he exclaimed, his voice tinged with frustration. His friends exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. Eleanor, on the other hand, seemed unfazed by the added difficulty. She tracked the moving targets with ease, her eyes sharp and focused. Her shots were methodical, each one landing exactly where she intended. Even when a target zigzagged erratically, she adjusted her aim with lightning speed, hitting it dead center every time. The crowd erupted into murmurs of admiration. "How does she do it?" one spectator whispered. Another replied, "It's like she knows where the target's going before it moves." By the third round, the score was undeniable. Eleanor was dominating. Jake's frustration grew with each passing moment, his earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of reality. He tried to rally his friends, cracking jokes and making excuses, but the laughter felt hollow now. Even his crew seemed reluctant to join in, their attention fixed on the elderly woman who had turned their world upside down. Jake decided to pull out all the stops for the final round. He chose the most difficult setup possible, multiple targets, at varying distances, some partially obscured by barriers. It was a challenge designed to push even the most skilled shooters to their limits. As he lined up his first shot, he glanced over at Eleanor, hoping to catch a flicker of doubt in her expression. But there was none. She stood quietly, waiting for her turn, her focus unwavering. Jake fired his first shot and missed. The crowd let out a collective sigh. He adjusted his aim and tried again, this time grazing the edge of a target. His face flushed red with embarrassment as whispers spread through the spectators. "He's losing it," someone muttered. Another added, "She's running circles around him." When Eleanor stepped up to the firing line, the room fell silent. Every eye was on her, every breath held in anticipation. She scanned the range, taking in the positions of the targets. Then, with the same calm precision she had shown throughout the competition, she began firing. Each shot rang out like a declaration of mastery, striking each target cleanly and without hesitation. Even the most obscured ones, barely visible through narrow gaps in the barriers, were hit with pinpoint accuracy. As the final shot echoed through the range, the crowd erupted into applause. Spectators clapped and cheered, their respect for Eleanor evident in their expressions. Some shook their heads in disbelief while others simply stared in awe. The elitists, including Jake, stood frozen, their earlier mockery replaced by stunned silence. They had come to the range expecting to assert their dominance, to prove that they were the best. Instead, they had been humbled by a woman who carried herself with grace and humility, yet wielded a rifle like a legend. Jake finally found his voice, though it came out quieter than usual. I didn't realize," he stammered, unable to finish his sentence. Eleanor lowered her rifle and turned to face him. Her expression was kind, free of any trace of triumph or condescension. "We all start somewhere," she said gently. "Just try to learn from this moment." Her words lingered in the air, carrying a weight that resonated with everyone present. Jake nodded slowly, his pride bruised but not broken. For the first time that day, he looked at Eleanor not as an opponent to be defeated, but as someone from whom he could learn. And as the crowd dispersed, the shooting range felt different, not just for Jake and his friends, but for everyone who had witnessed the quiet power of a true master. The final round had concluded, and the shooting range was buzzing with a mix of awe and disbelief. Eleanor stood quietly at her station, lowering her rifle with the same calm grace she had displayed throughout the competition. Her movements were unhurried, almost meditative, as if nothing about the day's events had fazed her in the slightest. Meanwhile, Jake stood frozen near his own setup, his face flushed with a mixture of shame and frustration. The elitists who had cheered him on earlier now shifted awkwardly, their smug confidence replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Jake couldn't bring himself to meet Eleanor's gaze. Instead, he stared at the floor, replaying the last hour in his mind. He had entered the day expecting to dominate, to assert his superiority over anyone who dared step onto his range. But what had happened instead was something entirely different. This elderly woman, whom they had mocked and dismissed, without a second thought had dismantled every assumption they'd made about her, and not just with words. She had done it with action, precision, and undeniable skill. The weight of his humiliation pressed down on him, but beneath it lay another emotion: curiosity. Who was this woman? How could someone so unassuming possess such mastery over a craft he had spent years trying to perfect? Summoning what little courage he had left, Jake stepped forward. His voice wavered slightly as he spoke. I didn't realize." He trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. Apologizing wasn't something he was used to doing, especially not in front of an audience. But there was no denying that he owed her one, not just for the insults he'd hurled earlier, but for the way he had underestimated her from the start. Eleanor turned to face him, her expression calm and unreadable. She studied him for a moment before speaking. "It's all right," she said softly, her tone carrying a warmth that disarmed him completely. "We all make mistakes when we're young. What matters is whether we learn from them." Her words hung in the air, simple yet profound. They weren't harsh or accusatory. Instead, they carried a quiet wisdom that resonated deeply with everyone listening. Jake hesitated, then blurted out the question that had been gnawing at him since the first shot rang out. "How do you shoot like that? Who taught you?" His voice was tinged with genuine curiosity now, the arrogance stripped away by the events of the day. For the first time, he wasn't asking to mock or belittle. He truly wanted to understand. Eleanor paused, considering his question. Then, without a word, she reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out a faded photograph. It was worn around the edges, its colors dulled by time, but the image was clear enough. In it, a much younger Eleanor stood alongside a group of soldiers, her uniform crisp and adorned with medals. Beneath the photo was an inscription etched in bold letters: "To Eleanor Grayson, the finest sniper our country has ever known." The room fell deathly silent as Jake took the photograph in his hands. His eyes widened as he studied it, piecing together the truth. This wasn't just some hobbyist who happened to be good with a rifle. Eleanor Grayson was a legend, a name, whispered in military circles, a figure whose feats were the stuff of stories told late at night around campfires. Yet here she was, standing before him, humble and unassuming, as if none of it mattered. Slowly, the pieces clicked into place for the others too. Spectators exchanged glances, their whispers growing louder. "That's her," one man murmured. Another replied, "I heard rumors about her during basic training. Thought they were exaggerations." The elitists looked at each other, their earlier mockery replaced by a mixture of respect and disbelief. Even Jake's friends, who had egged him on throughout the day, now seemed humbled, their heads bowed as if acknowledging the gravity of their earlier behavior. Jake handed the photograph back to Eleanor, his hands trembling slightly. I didn't know, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. If I'd known. He trailed off again, unsure how to articulate the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him. Guilt, admiration, and a newfound determination wrestled for dominance. He felt small in that moment, not because Eleanor had bested him, but because she had shown him the vast gap between arrogance and true mastery. Eleanor accepted the photograph with a faint smile. You couldn't have known, she said gently. And that's okay. We don't always see the whole picture when we look at someone. Sometimes people carry histories and stories we can't imagine. All you can do is approach life with an open mind, and maybe a little humility. Her words struck a chord with everyone present. Jake nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. For years he had prided himself on his skills, believing himself untouchable. But Eleanor's performance, and her demeanor afterward, had exposed the cracks in his confidence. She hadn't gloated or sought revenge for his earlier rudeness. Instead, she had treated him with kindness, offering guidance rather than judgment. It was a stark contrast to the way he and his friends had behaved, and it forced him to confront the kind of person he wanted to be. As the crowd began to disperse, the mood in the range shifted once more. Where there had once been tension and hostility, there was now a sense of camaraderie. Spectators lingered, eager to speak with Eleanor and ask questions about her experiences. Some shared stories of their own, while others simply listened, captivated by her quiet wisdom. Even the elitists, who had started the day so full of bravado, joined in the conversation, their earlier arrogance replaced by genuine curiosity and respect. Jake stayed behind, lingering near Eleanor's station as she packed up her rifle. He watched her carefully, noting the care with which she handled her equipment. Finally, summoning his courage, he spoke. Can I ask you something else?" he asked hesitantly. Eleanor glanced up, her expression warm and inviting. "Of course," she replied. "What's the most important thing you've learned about shooting?" he asked. "Not just the technical stuff, what really matters." She smiled faintly as if expecting the question. "Patience," she said simply. "Shooting isn't about speed or power. It's about waiting for the right moment and trusting yourself when it comes. It's about knowing your limits and respecting the weapon in your hands. And most importantly, it's about remembering that no matter how skilled you become, there's always more to learn." Jake nodded, letting her words sink in. He realized then that Eleanor wasn't just talking about shooting. She was sharing a philosophy for life. Her advice applied to everything: relationships, work, personal growth. It wasn't about being the best. It was about striving to improve, staying humble, and treating others with kindness even when they didn't deserve it. As Eleanor finished packing her gear and prepared to leave, Jake extended his hand. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "For everything. I won't forget this." Eleanor shook his hand firmly, her grip steady despite her age. "Take care, son," she said with a gentle smile. "And remember, it's not the size of the gun, it's the skill of the shooter." With that, she turned and walked away, her cane tapping softly against the floor. The crowd parted to let her pass, their expressions a mix of admiration and gratitude. As she disappeared through the door, the shooting range felt different, quieter perhaps, but also richer. Everyone who had witnessed the day's events knew they had been part of something special, a moment that would stay with them for years to come. For Jake and his friends, the lesson was clear. Greatness often hides in plain sight, and true mastery is defined not by arrogance but by humility. And as they returned to their stations, ready to practice with renewed focus, they couldn't help but wonder what other lessons life might have in store, if only they were willing to listen. In the days that followed Eleanor Grayson's visit to the shooting range, word of her incredible performance spread like wildfire. The elitists, who had once prided themselves on their superiority, found themselves humbled and reflective. Jake, in particular, couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. Every time he picked up his rifle, he remembered Eleanor's calm demeanor, her precise aim, and the quiet wisdom she had shared. It was as if she had left an invisible mark on him, one that refused to fade. The shooting community, too, was abuzz with talk of the old woman with the cane. Stories about her legendary skills made their way into conversations at local ranges, online forums, and even social media. Some shooters claimed they'd heard rumors about Eleanor years ago, tales of a sniper so skilled that she could hit targets others deemed impossible. Others dismissed these accounts as mere legends, but now, those same skeptics were forced to reconsider. Eleanor wasn't just a myth. She was real, and she had walked among them, proving her worth without ever needing to boast. Jake became obsessed with learning more about her. He scoured the internet for information, searching for anything that might shed light on her past. What he found only deepened his admiration. Articles from decades earlier spoke of Eleanor's service during wartime, detailing missions where her precision had turned the tide in critical moments. There were mentions of medals awarded for bravery, citations praising her unparalleled accuracy, and testimonials from fellow soldiers who credited her with saving lives. Yet despite her achievements, Eleanor had always remained out of the spotlight, preferring anonymity over fame. Determined to make amends and perhaps learn from her, Jake decided to track her down. It wasn't easy. Eleanor didn't have a flashy online presence or a public profile. But after asking around at the range and piecing together clues, he eventually discovered that she lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town. With a mix of nerves and determination, Jake drove there one afternoon, unsure of what to expect. When he arrived, he found himself standing in front of a small, well-kept home surrounded by lush gardens. Flowers bloomed in vibrant colors, and the air carried the faint scent of lavender. A wooden sign hanging near the entrance read, "Grayson's Garden," in elegant script. Taking a deep breath, Jake knocked on the door. After a moment, it opened, revealing Eleanor herself. She looked much the same as she had at the range, calm, composed, and radiating warmth. Her gray hair was tied back neatly, and she wore a simple cardigan over a floral dress. In her hands, she held a pair of gardening gloves, which she set aside when she saw who had come to visit. "Jake," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I wondered if you'd show up." Jake blinked in surprise. "You knew I'd come?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "Let's just say I've been around long enough to recognize when someone's looking for answers. Come in." She led him inside, gesturing for him to sit at a cozy kitchen table adorned with fresh flowers in a vase. As she brewed tea, Jake took in his surroundings. The house was simple yet welcoming, filled with photographs, books, and mementos that told the story of a life well lived. One picture caught his eye, a younger Eleanor posing with a group of soldiers, her rifle slung over her shoulder. It was the same photo she had shown him at the range, but seeing it framed on her wall gave it new meaning. Once the tea was ready, Eleanor joined him at the table. "So," she began, setting a steaming cup in front of him, "what brings you here?" Jake hesitated, unsure how to begin. Finally, he blurted out, "I wanted to apologize for everything, for mocking you, for underestimating you, for being such a jerk." His cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but he forced himself to continue. "I didn't know who you were or what you'd done. If I had, I never would have treated you the way I did." Eleanor listened patiently, her expression thoughtful. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "Apologies are important," she said. "They show growth. But don't dwell too much on the past, Jake. What matters is what you do moving forward." "I want to be better," he admitted. "Not just as a shooter, but as a person. You showed me that day that skill isn't about showing off. It's about respect, patience, and humility. And I realized I've been doing it all wrong." Eleanor's eyes softened. "You're not alone in that," she said. "Many people start out thinking mastery is about dominance or proving themselves superior. But true mastery is about understanding your craft and yourself. It's about knowing when to push harder and when to step back. That balance takes time to find." Over the next hour, they talked about shooting, life, and the lessons Eleanor had learned along the way. She shared stories from her military days, how she had trained tirelessly to hone her skills, how she had faced challenges that tested her resolve, and how she had learned to trust her instincts. She also emphasized the importance of kindness, explaining that even in the heat of competition, respect for others should always come first. As the conversation drew to a close, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. He thanked Eleanor for taking the time to speak with him, promising to apply her teachings both on and off the range. Before leaving, he noticed a framed quote hanging on her wall. "Aim true, live humble." It summed up everything she stood for, and Jake knew he would carry those words with him forever. Back at the shooting range, things began to change. Jake and his friends returned regularly, but their attitude underwent a dramatic transformation. Gone were the boasts and arrogance. In their place was humility and respect, not just for Eleanor, but for everyone they encountered. They started approaching newcomers with encouragement rather than judgment, sharing tips and advice instead of ridicule. Slowly but surely, the culture of the range shifted, becoming more inclusive and supportive. Eleanor continued to visit occasionally, always happy to share her knowledge with anyone willing to listen. She reminded everyone that mastery came not from flashy equipment or bravado, but from patience, practice, and passion. Her presence inspired countless shooters to strive for excellence while staying grounded in humility. For Jake, the impact of meeting Eleanor went beyond shooting. He framed the photograph she had shown him, not as a trophy but as a reminder of the day he learned that greatness often hides in plain sight. From then on, he approached life with a newfound appreciation for the lessons hidden within unexpected encounters. And as for Eleanor, she remained exactly who she had always been, a quiet, unassuming legend whose legacy would continue to inspire generations to come. Weeks turned into months, and the shooting range became a different place entirely. The elitists, once known for their arrogance and dismissive attitudes, had transformed into mentors and guides for newcomers. Jake, in particular, took it upon himself to ensure that no one ever felt unwelcome or belittled at the range. He remembered all too well how Eleanor had treated him, not with disdain or anger, but with kindness and understanding. Her example stuck with him, shaping the way he interacted with others. Every time someone new walked through the doors of the range, Jake made it a point to introduce himself. Whether it was a teenager holding a rifle for the first time or an older adult looking to pick up a hobby, Jake greeted them warmly. "Welcome," he'd say with a smile. "Take your time getting set up. If you need help, just let me know." His friends followed suit, offering tips and encouragement rather than criticism. The elitists' reputation shifted from being intimidating braggarts to approachable experts who genuinely cared about helping others improve. Eleanor's influence wasn't limited to Jake and his crew. Word of her legendary skills and her humility spread far beyond the local shooting community. People traveled from neighboring towns and cities just to meet her, hoping to learn from the woman whose name had become synonymous with precision and grace. Some came seeking advice on technique, others simply wanted to hear her stories. And while Eleanor never sought recognition, she welcomed these visitors with open arms, sharing her wisdom freely. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed the shooting range in golden light, Eleanor arrived for what would be her final visit. She moved slowly, leaning heavily on her cane, but her eyes sparkled with the same quiet determination that had always defined her. The crowd noticed immediately, gathering around her with a mix of excitement and reverence. Jake stepped forward, concern etched on his face. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Eleanor nodded, her smile reassuring. "I'm fine, Jake. Just getting older, that's all." She paused, glancing around at the faces surrounding her. "But before I go, there's something I want to say." The range fell silent, every ear tuned to her voice. Even those who hadn't met her before leaned in, eager to hear what she had to share. Eleanor adjusted her glasses, then began speaking in her calm, measured tone. "When I first came here, many of you doubted me. You saw my age, my cane, my old rifle, and assumed I didn't belong. And maybe I didn't look like much back then. But life has taught me that appearances can be deceiving. What truly matters isn't how we look or what tools we use. It's the effort we put in, the respect we show others, and the lessons we carry with us. She paused, letting her words sink in. The crowd stood motionless, hanging on every syllable. I've spent my life mastering this craft because I love it, not because I wanted fame or glory. Shooting has been my passion, my purpose, and sometimes even my refuge. But more than anything, it's been a teacher. It's taught me patience, discipline, and the value of humility. Those are lessons I hope you'll take with you, not just in shooting, but in everything you do. Tears welled up in the eyes of some listeners, while others nodded solemnly, absorbing her message. Eleanor continued, her voice steady despite the weight of her emotions. To those of you who've embraced these values, to those who've worked hard, supported one another, and approached life with an open heart, I couldn't be prouder. This range isn't just a place to practice. It's a community, and communities thrive when people lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. As she finished speaking, applause erupted throughout the range. It wasn't loud or boisterous, but heartfelt and sincere, a standing ovation for a woman who had changed lives without ever asking for gratitude. Eleanor smiled, her cheeks flushed with modesty, and raised a hand to quiet the crowd. There's one last thing, she said, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a small wooden box and handed it to Jake. This is for you, she explained. Open it later. Jake accepted the gift with trembling hands, unsure what to say. Thank you, he managed, his voice thick with emotion. For everything. Eleanor nodded, then turned to leave. As she walked away, the crowd parted respectfully, watching her disappear into the twilight. Though no one knew it at the time, this would be the last they'd see of her at the range. But her presence lingered, in the laughter of newfound friendships, in the focus of diligent practice, and in the shared commitment to growth and kindness. That night, after returning home, Jake opened the wooden box Eleanor had given him. Inside was a medal, the same one from the photograph she had shown him months earlier. Beneath it lay a handwritten note. To Jake, may this remind you that true greatness lies not in trophies or accolades, but in the impact we have on others. Keep aiming true, living humble, and inspiring those around you. With admiration, Eleanor. Tears streamed down Jake's face as he read the note. He held the medal in his palm, feeling its weight not as a symbol of victory, but as a reminder of the legacy Eleanor had entrusted to him. From that moment on, he vowed to honor her memory by continuing to spread the values she had instilled in him. In the years that followed, the shooting range flourished. Newcomers were welcomed with open arms, veterans mentored beginners, and competitions were held not to prove superiority, but to celebrate progress. A plaque was mounted near the entrance, bearing Eleanor's favorite quote, "Aim true, live humble." It served as a permanent tribute to the woman who had transformed the range, and countless lives, with her quiet strength and enduring wisdom. Though Eleanor eventually passed away, her spirit lived on in the stories told by those who had known her. Parents taught their children about the legendary sniper who valued kindness over skill, and instructors repeated her lessons to eager students. Her name became a beacon of inspiration, reminding everyone that true greatness often hides in plain sight, and that the most powerful lessons are those learned from the unlikeliest of teachers.